And I'm going to pause it there. I made this video about 4 months ago in between 2 lockdowns. And much like a lot of the first wave lockdown babies that are now being born, when I made it, I didn't really know what I was up to. And after the fact, when I'd finished it, I kind of regretted it. I don't think it's a particularly good video, but there is some stuff in there that's interesting. I think the best thing to do now, particularly in the absence of making any other videos for 6 months, is that we put this one out together with a bit of commentary. Let's watch. There are 3 things you probably ought to know about Canary Wharf. You can tell I've had a bit of an extreme haircut there, where it's been very, very many months since I've had one of those. The first thing is it is one massive piece of privately owned public space. It's a bunch of streets and shops and housing and squares and bus stops and train stations, all of which is owned by a private company. It's not owned by a London borough, it's not owned by the government, it's not even owned by the Queen. It's owned by Brookfield Property Partners and the Qatar Investment Authority. Because nothing here is public, even in the streets and the pavements and the roads, they can sort of do anything they like with it. Technically, they can arbitrarily ban anyone from doing anything they don't like here. Technically, I ought to have permission to even film here. And this isn't the only one in London. Gradually all over the place, our public space is being sort of whittled away by private developers. But this one's probably the most famous. Do you actually care? Unlikely. But to give you a slightly more worrying example, a City Hall, which is where Sadiq Khan and his authority work, is in the middle of an estate called the More London Estate, which is a privately owned public space. Quite recently, some Guardian journalists tried to conduct some interviews outside of City Hall, and they were escorted away by the More London security guards, saying that interviewing people was not permitted on their private land, which is a little bit, concerning. That's all essentially true, but the way that I'm presenting that is deliberately polarised, and I actually don't quite agree with myself when I watch it back. The reality isn't that public space is becoming private, it's that there's a whole host of new spaces that look public but truly aren't, and you don't know that when you're sitting in them. The reason it's happening, by the way, is that if you're creating some large new residential or commercial property and you want to get planning permission for it, you now have to demonstrate that there's some part of it that is for the public good. That's why the Sky Garden exists, for example. That's why there's a whole host of theatres which are being included in complexes that are otherwise offices and shops and things like that. It's to get planning permission. The issue isn't that there are new public spaces, it's that you should A, know when you're in one, and B, know the rules of it whilst you're there. Some people would say that if it's been presented as a public space and it's been created for that purpose, you might make it truly public, that it might be handed back from the private developer to the local borough or something like that. I don't know about that, but I was being a bit sneaky in the way that I talked about it. Let's go on. The second thing everyone should know about Canary Wharf The second thing everyone should know about Canary Wharf is that if you're heading to the DLR, it is much quicker to exit the Jubilee Line station and head towards Heron Quay's DLR stop, instead of going through the endlessly confusing corridors of shopping centre that lead you towards the Canary Wharf DLR station. That'll shave you about 45 seconds off your journey. You can thank me later. Now, if you're thinking, a tiny shortcut doesn't seem like something I need to know about Canary Wharf, then you'd be right. I agree with you. It isn't. And whilst you're doing that, you'll spot the third thing that you need to know about Canary Wharf, and that is that in 1982, a de Havilland Dash 2... That was wrong, it's actually a Dash 7. It even says it on the plaque that you'll see at the end of the video. Very poor. Quad propeller airplane landed slap bang in the middle of where all of these skyscrapers are now. You see, the London Docklands Development Corporation were a sort of government quango that was set up to try and regenerate all the wharves and docks that lined the Thames in the 1980s. They figured that an airport would be quite helpful to that goal, but they needed to prove somehow that you could actually land something in one of the narrow strips of land left behind by the shipping companies. These had been carved out in the 1800s by companies trying to find somewhere to dock and unload their ships. And it's a whole story in and of itself, but by 1982 the boats had all gone, and this was a chance to prove that you could land and take off an airplane within London's Docklands. And on the day itself, the plane flew around a bit, they invited spectators, the media, politicians, the plane started to come into land, and they did it. He did it. Captain Harry Gee did it. And he took off again, and there was very little drama about it. In fact, it was a massive PR success, and 5 years later, in a different set of docks up the river, the London City Airport was opened. And they put up this plaque, which, let's face it, it's more than you've ever achieved. What I didn't make clear there is the plane didn't land in Canary Wharf, it landed on Heron's Wharf, which is now Heron Keys, but I just don't think anybody cares. I don't think anyone's going to care. It's fine, it's absolutely fine. That was the whole video, by the way, that was it. A couple of days later, I made another video which was even shorter and even more poorly constructed, so you can look forward to seeing that one in the near future. Right, bye-bye then. Bye. Bye.